My name is Faith Yedidah Spann, and I am a survivor of sexual abuse trauma and also being duped. When I was a child, and my aunt tells me this story, I had no idea. My mom, who is deceased now, love her so much. She went to go see this movie that I've never watched called Rosemary's Baby the day before I was born. And so the day that I was born, she had a nervous breakdown. I was told basically that she was unresponsive on the day I was born. So according to what I was told, I was in foster care from the time of birth until I was about 3 or 4 years old. I hated the fact they made us watch horror movies. I loved the fact that they had chocolate brownies. And I also did not like the fact that they farted on our heads. And additionally, we were beat with cords and all kinds of other things. So I believe my mom came to pick me up when I was around 4 or 5 years old. I remembered my mom coming to pick us up, and she was about to leave, and we started to tell her that they were beating us. She was very upset about that, but that was the catalyst from our little voices that helped her to actually take us from that place. And I remember my mom coming to see us, and we basically told her, listen, these people are whipping us with cords and sticks and doing all kinds of things and making us watch horror movies. And so that was the day that my mom, thank God, just kind of said, okay, you're not staying here, and took us home to live with her. I didn't know my mother to ever be mentally embarrassed, and that's why I was pretty shocked when they told me this story. It seemed like the perfect thing, the perfect time, and it was my brother, myself, and my mom. It seemed like it was going to be so much better than being in foster care, but there were some other things that came about. I later found out the gentleman who I thought was my dad all those years was really not my real dad, that my real dad had been murdered around the age of 4. And so this gentleman was a molester. He was very, very abusive. He was definitely a deceiver. And that's about the first time in my life where I had to, what I call being double-minded, because I was afraid to tell my mom because of things he would say, you'll get in trouble. This is our little secret. You can't tell your mom. And I thought this man was a monster. But because I believed he was my dad, there was a part of me that wanted to show respect. But mostly I did not want to get in trouble from my mother. I loved her dearly. The first time that I was molested was the introduction of what he called a comic book. And it was really a pornographic magazine. I was really young, very confused about that. I remember taking the pillow and putting it over my head, over my face, while he was doing what he was doing. And in my mind, I was screaming, and I was just like, God, I don't want you to even see me. This is terrible. And at a point, I felt like I wanted to squeeze with my little self, squeeze the life out of him. I just couldn't believe that that was happening to me. But then he would do things, which is what happens with molesters. Like, okay, I'm going to take her out to go get milkshakes and Franks. And I stopped eating those things. I didn't want to eat burgers. And that was a really, really tough time. I couldn't really tell my brother. I didn't have the language. I was afraid. And I said, listen, he's going to come get me tonight. Don't go to sleep. And just as usual, door opens, he taps me. My brother was knocked out, and he took me into the back room again. When I look at it in hindsight, I'm glad he was asleep, because he was very abusive, and I don't know what he would have done to my brother. So for me to have to go through that alone was worth my brother not being wounded by this man. So the person who molested me, he had some very, very serious violent and anger issues. He was never violent to me, however. I was still being abused. He was abusive to my mom. He was abusive to my brother. And I hated that, the way that he would hurt my brother, hit my brother. I didn't always get to see him doing it. We lived in an apartment that had, at the top towards the ceiling, it was like a cutout into the next room. So if I was in the kitchen area, I could see that he was hitting him, and I could hear it. With my mom, it's just the fighting, just hearing the abuse. One day she wanted to go out. We had an acoustic guitar on the wall. And one day I just heard, it was like the sound of the guitar, that the guitar hit something, and I could hear the strings, ding, like that. And then I heard my mom screaming in pain. And I just knew, that he had really wounded her to the point that she had to go to the hospital. and we stayed with my grandparents for some time. Thereafter, I remember not being at the house. Him and my mom had separated, and so we were visiting. And it was late at night, and I was sleeping on the pull-out couch, and he came and tapped me awake. I was a very light sleeper, and he took me by the hand and took me into his room. And as he did that, he kind of like lay down. I was shocked, very young, for like, what is going on? And then he continued to do what no child ever deserves to have happen to them. Living in that environment, it was dual for me, because once again, I saw my mom as the strong woman that she was. Even though the abuse was there, I know that she loved us. She loved me. I remember being bullied in school, and I would want to hide. I would sit in the back of the classroom, but I knew in order to get a good grade, I'd have to answer questions. And if I did, if I ever raised my hand, I would get a note passed to me from the bully, "See you in the playground at 3:00," because they wanted to fight because I used my voice. I remember when the school would tell me, "Your mom wants you to call her after school," and I would go to the payphone and I would call my mom, and she would say, "Go over to his house." And I would start crying, "Mommy, no, please, I don't want to go. Please, I don't want to go." But I never told her why until later in life when I became a teenager. Afterwards, I learned how to put up a mask to hide. I was very shy, as a matter of fact. Once again, I loved my mom, so it was almost like I just smiled through everything. That was my way of coping, but I also learned to write. And so I would resort to writing poetry. I would resort to writing songs. And I found solace in music and in the creative arts. One day, my mother was no longer with him, and we were driving in the back of a car, my mother's friend, and there was a Time magazine, and I love to read, so I opened up the magazine, and I opened up to a story of a woman who had told her mother that she had been molested. And I remember my brother was sitting here, my mom in the passenger seat, her friend in the driver's seat, and I took the magazine and I held it up in front of my face because I didn't want them to see that I was crying, and they didn't. But that was the day that her story gave me permission to tell mine. Her story gave me permission no longer to feel like I had to be ashamed because I was a child when it started. And it went on for years. But I no longer had to be that little girl who felt like she didn't have a voice. And so I told my mother, and I remember that day very, very vividly. And I told her I had to share something with her. We went into the bathroom, closed the door. And I said, "Mom, you know the story of the girl that someone did something to her?" She told her mom. She said, "Yes." I said, "Well, Mom, she's like me. I didn't cry when I told her. I had already cried many tears." And she looked at me, and I just remember her running the bath water. And she ran it, and I was sitting on her lap at the time. But what I did not know was that my mom was going to Brooklyn to go to take this man's life. I didn't find out until later that she had gone to do that because she came back, hours later. So Mom went to Brooklyn, I was told, to take his life, and that she had taken a knife out of the kitchen. I believe what happened was he wasn't at the house, spared his life, and spared her, is what I want to say, from having to go to jail. One of the things that I have discovered is that in my generation, it was children are to be seen and not heard. And sometimes we take that same type of thinking with us into our adulthood. I believe it's important for parents to share what happened to them as children so that it allows us to be able to say there's nothing wrong with us. It gives us the right to be able to say we can't let this happen again. I also understand that there are some people who will judge the person who was molested. "Oh, you should have. Oh, why didn't you? I did this." But everyone is not the same. And everyone's life leads them to a point that causes them to make decisions, whether it seems like it's a good decision or not. And so we have to allow people to just have their experience and be supportive of them through it and not bash them because they've already been wounded enough. So I believe that when a person is abused as a child, sexual abuse trauma, that if they don't talk about it and break off the shame that's associated with it, and also realize that that was not a form of love, that there will be what I like to call like an open door to sometimes another level of abuse where somebody will look at that individual and see that they're kind, or they're very giving, or they're very loving, and they will use that as an opportunity, especially if you share your story and that individual has some things that they have not really shared or been delivered from, I'll put it that way, then they may even hate women because their nanny did that to them, or their mom And it's a transference that happens. And so instead of them seeing me as being loving, it's like, oh, here's this woman who's trying to be strong, and I don't really know why, or maybe they are strong and I hate that about them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break her. I remember I was walking through the park one day, and this man, as I walked by, I was in my dream job. I loved it. I walked by and he said to me, do you know that you intimidate men? And I looked back, me? Well, no, if I do, I don't mean to. He says, well, you do. And what I realized after I thought about it a couple of months ago, it wasn't that I intimidated men. It was the fact that they saw strength. Whoever it was who needed help, they were intimidated by the strength of a woman who loves people. And sometimes that's the very thing that some people, men or women, will go after. They don't know what you've gone through. They don't know how you've had to fight most of your life. And they will see that strength and try to destroy it. The relationship the one that I would say almost tried to tear my entire life apart. And I've had other relationships also. I want to add that as well, where I was not making the best decision and choice. I had smarts. I have a 4.2 GPA, but I knew nothing about street smarts. It's totally different. And plus the kindness of my heart and the loving. And so I met this gentleman. I lived in a building with a doorman in Harlem. And I remember I had gone down with the family. They were going to see The Color Purple, and I got dressed up, got back to the building, and he was in the lobby. And I went to get on the elevator, but he pulled me back because there was another gentleman getting on the elevator who, I don't know, something, I guess, looked like he didn't want me to get on there. And he begins to talk to me, and all I want to do is get upstairs. And I should have followed my gut to get away. So he continues to talk to me about the type of work he does and all of these things. And I gave him my card because I wanted to go. And he asked me this question. He says, are you married? And I said, no, I'm waiting on the Lord. I am too. Oh my gosh, you're waiting. He says something like, I'm going to be in town to the weekend and I'd like to see you again. And I was just like, I just want to get upstairs. So one day the doorman rang my phone and he called up and said, I have a package for you. And I went down to get the package. I used to call that doorman Shifty Eyes. There was something about him that I just didn't care for. And he gave me the package. I opened it up and it's a picture of that gentleman in his uniform. He was a police officer and a Marine. And he had writing on the back that said something like, I'm looking forward to us sharing our lives together. So we started having conversations and he started talking the language that I love, talking about God, quoting scriptures and different things like that. And I was hooked. As a matter of fact, I felt like God had sent me my knight in shining armor. That was a lie. We continued to talk, and I will say that it wasn't a long relationship because he just kept telling me like he's this high-ranking official and whatever we did, we had to marry quickly, and his friend who's a reverend was going to marry us because all of these things. And so I was kind of going with the flow because one day he said to me, my sister's been in prayer. I have her on the phone and she's got something to tell us. And she said, there's a young man who's been coming, across your threshold before we got together. And he named his first and last name. I thought this man was about prophetic as I don't know what. How would he know that? He then started to talk about things that were in my apartment and what it looked like. How would he know that? I believe the doorman was sharing information with him. So we started having this long distance relationship, and we were probably together for, it was not long, a couple of months. But because he knew so much about me, I went all in. So he started to become verbally abusive, very controlling, had my social security number, was trying to take out loans, car loans and different things like that, shredded all of my pictures of my mom who is deceased, pictures of my baby who was our daughter. He was the only man that I had relations in that regard. Although I was molested, I was never broken. And he would say some of the meanest things, and it was breaking me down. I believe at a point that I started to fear this man. I just couldn't put my finger on it. Something was wrong. And he left for what he called an assignment. But what I didn't realize was that I was the assignment. He had multiple assignments. I was told that he was never married with any children. I later found out that his name, his identity, the fact that he had never been married before, it was all a lie. And I had been duped. When I found out I had been duped, I was devastated. A friend of mine was with me and we found a number for him because he had disappeared. He abandoned me and my daughter. And I found out the truth, that he was with someone else and he had another child, and I had waited for him to return from assignment, and I almost collapsed on the streets of Harlem. The dreams, everything was just, it was over. I became homeless because I was sending money to him, and he had a lot of promises, you know, don't worry, we're going to have a big home, we're going to have a studio in the home, and all of these things, because I love to sing. And I ended up living with some people who were like family, relative, friends. And one day, we just had to leave. And then I went to go be with him in the state that he was in, and he told me he was going on assignment again. And instead of being with him for 2 weeks before he left, it was only about 45 minutes. And I waited and I waited and I waited. And that was 2009. That was the last time that I saw him intentionally, if I put it that way. I believe I saw him walking down the street one day with another woman, but I was too shocked to even believe it. He was good at what he did. So my life basically fell apart. It was like the rug had been yanked from underneath. And I ended up dealing with homelessness, although I was trying to get back on top of things. My identity, it was not the same. That strong woman, I was broken and I was ashamed after isolating because I did not want to tell anyone what happened to me, or would they even believe it in the first place. So being homeless was something that was very difficult, something I thought I would never have had to experience in my entire life. I ended up being in a transitional facility. And the most interesting thing about it was that the people kept saying, why are you here? You're educated. You're this, you're that. And I basically said, well, why am I not? Who am I? So I want to say, despite all of the things that I have encountered in my life, I am thankful. I am grateful. I have a beautiful daughter. I am an author. I'm a motivational speaker. I have coached women who also found themselves in a difficult spot and were able to say, I am valuable. I wrote a book called Don't Give Up, Acknowledging the Struggle, Celebrating Resilience, about my life and my story. And it has inspired others to keep going despite life's challenges. So I want to say this to anyone who has been a victim of sexual abuse trauma or narcissistic abuse, domestic violence. You are more valuable than you could ever imagine. You are special right where you are today. Just because they didn't see your worth does not mean that you cannot see your worth. I learned that God doesn't throw away broken things. He has helped me through this. I did not get here by myself. It took prayer. It took making the choice to want to heal, to forgive, to release the very things and even the anger that I felt I had a right to own. If that's you today, I want you to release it, because I don't want you to walk around with the weight that someone else put on you. You can release it and let it go and give yourself permission to live, to love, to hope, and to sit or stand in any space that you occupy, because you're alive, and that's worth celebrating.